Hello and welcome to the College Throwers Academy weightlifting video masterclass. I'm very excited to welcome you. This has been a project a long time in the works and we're excited to get rolling into it. So in this video course, we're going to go through first the warm-up and the technique for the main lifts that you need to be focusing on as a shot put, discus, or hammer thrower. We're going to go through the squat, the bench press, overhead lifts, and of course the Olympic lifts technique from the ground up. So even if you're an experienced lifter, I guarantee you're gonna come away with some new information from this. And if you're brand new to, say, the Olympic lifts, you're gonna come away knowing the basics so that you can start rolling with those in the weight room. We're also gonna talk about some things like periodization, how to organize your training in more of a classroom setting towards the end of this course. So let's get rolling into it. The first thing that we need to do is talk about how to get a proper warm-up in, because that's very important as far as injury prevention and maximizing what we can get out of our lifting session. From there, we're going to talk about lifting gear, belts, sleeves, things like that, and then we'll actually get into the technique of lifting. Let's get into it. So before we actually get into the rack and get underneath the barbell and start doing some reps, warm up is the first thing that we need to invest in. So there's some different ways you can go about warming up, but in general, you're gonna wanna start with about 5 to 10 minutes of light cardio. So you can hop on a bike. We have some bikes in the gym here. If you don't have access to a bike, just go for a little jog, even 3 to 4 minutes, just something to get the muscles loosened up, get your joints flowing, and just start to get your heart rate up, right? That's gonna do a lot for preventing injury and preparing you. The next thing, and again, this is where personal preference will come into things. I kind of developed my own warm-up routine as I went through my career as a 20-meter shot putter at the University of Tennessee. So this is a routine that I developed over the course of 2 to 3 years and then kind of settled into. So I always liked, after my cardio, to do some foam rolling, right? And I found that really went a long way as far as injury prevention went. I'd had a lot of lower back injuries in the course of my career. So I would just get a foam roller and you just start rolling out your glutes, hamstrings, upper back, to just kind of get everything loosened up. All right, we can go to the upper back now. And I would just go through, spend about 5 minutes on that, right? Hitting your quads as well. But yeah, certainly your calves and your hamstrings. Once you've done that, we want to take a band, right? You want to take a stretching band and you want to do some, if you're doing an upper body lift, you want to do some specific strength exercises or specific warm-up exercises for your upper body, right? So here, band pull-aparts is a really good one to do before overhead movements and pressing, specifically bench pressing. So you can do 2 to 3 sets of 10 of these. You can change up the grip, do another couple sets underhand grip, and then we can actually do some overhead chest stretching too. So moving it front to back, and you should feel this really in your pecs and your biceps. All right, so this is just a regular red stretching band that you can use. And then my upper body at this point is feeling pretty loose, right? After a couple sets like that will really help to prevent shoulder injuries. Now, lower body stretching, very key as well, right? So we want to stretch out the hips specifically before a squat or a Olympic lifting workout. So I like this, some people will call this like a butterfly or figure 4 stretch. Just put your front leg like in front of you at a bit of a right angle, and then you just kind of lean over and you should feel that in your hip and your glute. So that way it's not totally static stretching, like you are feeling some movement there as well, right? So just kind of rock back and forth about 10 times. You want to hold it for maybe 20 seconds and then do the other side from there. While you're down here, it's also good to do some core activation as well, specifically before you're doing a squat or again, an Olympic lift, because a lot of times, especially a lot of throwers will have a lot of lower back problems. I was no exception to that, but what I found really helped me manage that was making sure I was engaging my core in lifts that I knew were going to be taxing on my lower back, right? So, and a good way to make sure that happens is to actually do a little bit of core work before you actually get under the bar. So just sit in a plank for 20 seconds, right? You can move your legs around a little bit, get the side core muscles engaged, up and down. You can even squeeze your glutes too, because glute activation, as you're gonna see, is very, very important. And then we can kind of go through and finish the rest of our stretching routine, right? So a lunge stretch here, you can do it against a wall as well if you want more of a stretch. Do the other side. You can kind of stand up and get your adductors as well, right? Just open up your lower body as much as you can. And once you've gone through, you know, about 10, 15 minutes of stretching upper, lower body, at that point, you want to move into some more dynamic movements. Some sprint drills are really good. A skips, B skips, butt kicks. We would do like a leg crossover movement. We call it a karaoke as well. Just things to kind of get the body moving in a more dynamic way to prepare yourself before you get into the gym. Once we've gone through that warm-up routine, we're ready to get into the rack and start hitting some lifts. But the next thing we're gonna do is talk about lifting gear. So shoes, you see I have some shoes on, belts, things like that. So we're gonna go over everything you need in the next video. So we've gone through a good warm up, heart rate is up. I wanna take a minute to go through the various types of lifting gear that you may wanna invest in before you actually start lifting. Now, just as a disclaimer, lifting gear is not something that you really need to be thinking about if you're just starting out in the weight room. So until you're benching, say, over 250 pounds, squatting over 365 pounds, cleaning, again, over about 250 pounds, you don't really need to think about spending a lot of time with gear, sleeves, straps. Just spend some time getting bigger and stronger and think about that later. But once you're at that point, it can certainly make a difference. So the first thing, lifting shoes, Olympic lifting shoes. I have a pair on now. These are actually the same pair I was given as a college freshman 9 or 10 years ago. So it's pretty amazing. They're still in pretty good shape. These are Nike Olympic lifting shoes. The benefit of them is they're very hard bottom, right? So they give you a really solid base to push off against when you're doing a squat or an Olympic lift. They also elevate your heel about 1.5 inches, right? You can see this elevated heel portion of the shoe, and that just puts you in a better position when you're in a squat, right? It makes it easier to go down, squat down, and hit full depth. So Olympic lifting shoes, absolutely a must as you're getting to a higher level with your lifting. Next thing, lifting belt, right? So this one, it's a pretty heavy duty belt. This is like a powerlifting belt. So you basically put it on and you want to go pretty tight, like about as tight as you can get it. And then it just really helps you brace, right? So it helps you, if you breathe into it, helps you engage your whole core muscle, and it can help prevent some injuries with the lower back. You don't want to use it as a Band-Aid solution, but it can be very useful in just supporting your midsection. Now, I will say, powerlifting belts tend to have a pretty big lip that come over. Like you can see it right here, right? Like it kind of sticks out a little bit. That isn't ideal when you're actually doing Olympic lifting, right? Because that lip can actually get in the way of the barbell. So I use this belt primarily for squats, squat variations, overhead lifts, military press, split jerks, push press, that type of thing. When I was actually Olympic lifting, I had a thinner belt, right? They do make, like this is a very thick belt, right? It's almost a centimeter thick leather. They make belts that are about half that thickness, and I would always use like one of those lighter belts. Our school would supply those. When I was doing Olympic lifting, it wouldn't have such a big lip that would stick out, and it wouldn't get in the way of my bar path as I was going through a clean or a snatch. So that's your belt, very helpful. The next thing, sleeves, right? They call this material neoprene, right? Neoprene sleeves. And what these do, like this is for your knee, right? So you'd put it on over before your shoe. We're not gonna put them on today. We're not gonna be going super heavy, but I use these religiously. I don't know, I have thousands of lifts in these sleeves. They probably don't smell too good either, but that's okay. So you're gonna put those on, and it applies some compression to your joint, but it also keeps the joint really warm. So you will get really sweaty underneath that sleeve, but the compression and the warmth can just give your joints a little bit of support, but it also helps prevent injury as well. So I was very comfortable lifting in these. They can help you go a little heavier, but again, if you're having a knee injury, you want to get to the bottom of that, and you don't want to use these as a Band-Aid solution to mask pain, right? So sleeves, elbow sleeves as well. So same idea, you're just gonna, you're gonna put it on your elbow like this, supports the elbow joint, very helpful when you're doing bench press, right? It'll keep that joint nice and warm. So I use these quite a bit. The elbow sleeves are usually a little thinner. So I believe these are 5mm neoprene. The knee sleeves, they make them in 5mm. They also make them in 7mm, which is what those are. That's the thickest ones you can get. So sleeves, I don't have a pair with me today. There also are knee wraps. Wraps are different than sleeves. Wraps are actually like an elastic, very heavy duty material. They're about this wide, this thick, and you're gonna wrap them around your knee joints. That can actually give your knees like more elastic support as you're lifting. Again, unless you're lifting 500 pounds plus in your squat, I wouldn't use them at all. Even if you are an experienced squatter, they're not something that you wanna use a lot. They're something you wanna use very sparingly. Like I think I used knee wraps maybe 4 times in my whole career, just when we were going really heavy, right? So it's not something you wanna use a lot of. So that's wraps. Final thing, lifting straps, right? You've probably seen these. Very helpful for things like deadlifts and Olympic lifts, because you take these straps, they're on my wrists, you wrap them around the barbell, and then it kind of eliminates grip strength from the lift, right? So a lot of times when you're doing a real heavy deadlift or Olympic lift, it can actually be your grip strength that is giving way first, even though your body could probably do more weight. So the straps allow you to grip more weight and go a little bit heavier, because you're not limited to what your hands can hang on to, because you're strapped into the bar. So that's some gear. Wrist support is another thing I want to talk about. There's a few options with that. You can get like lifting straps for your wrist. There's a little piece on your thumb that goes around your thumb, and then it's stretchy material you wrap around your wrist. That is an option. I always use athletic tape, right? A little bit more expensive. You have to wrap it on every time. It's a little uncomfortable too, because it'll like rip the hairs off your wrist, but you get used to it. I found the tape was a lot more supportive than wraps for me. So I always use tape, but again, if you're on a budget and you don't want to have to be taping your wrist every single lift, just go ahead and get yourself a pair of lifting straps for your wrist. You can get them real cheap on Amazon, and they should serve you for many, many years. So that is gear, right? We got our shoes on, we've gone through all our gear. Now we're ready to start going into some technique. And we're gonna start with the king of all lifts, the squat. So stay tuned. So the first lift that we're gonna cover and really go into some technique on is the back squat, really the king of all lifts. It's such a strong foundation for everything that you're gonna do in the circle, but a lot of other movements that we're gonna do in the weight room as well. So when people ask me, Joe, can I just swap out my squats for leg press? The answer is absolutely not. We can definitely make some accommodations, make some substitutions for other lifts. The squat, you're gonna need to figure out a way to do that and get strong at it, because it's something just that you're gonna need to do, right? The first thing that we wanna talk about here is mobility, right? And the squat actually takes a ton of mobility to do properly, right? To hit proper depth, it's a long way down to go. And you actually need a lot of hip mobility, glute mobility, like just general lower body mobility in order to hit that depth. So before you actually get into a squat, it's good to do a little bit more specific warm up. So you've gone through your general warm up, but then just grab the rack, come into a full squat position, and just sit here for a little bit. Move around a little bit, right? Get your calf stretched out, get your hips stretched out. That can be very, very helpful to hit full depth, right? Especially I'm stretching my back calf right now, and then my other calf here. So with lifting, a lot of times the setup is as important, if not more important, than the actual lift that we're gonna do, right? So we're ready to hit full depth. We've gone through that specific warm up. The first thing I'm gonna show you is just how to brace, right? How to set up the lift properly. So we got a little bit of weight on the bar today, not a whole lot. I did squat 655 at my best when I was in my prime, but we're just going for technique today. So the first thing you want to do is when you get under the bar, you want feet shoulder width apart, right? You don't want to do one of these, right? One of these lunge pickups. That's not going to be very safe. So we go feet shoulder width, maybe a little bit wider. And then before you take it off the rack, breath in, breath into your belly, and then tighten your core. Into the core, tighten, and then take it off. And then either take a step backward or step forward, depending on your rack setup. One step, another step, get set. Feet maybe a little wider than shoulder width, about a 45-degree angle, maybe a little bit less. And then before you go and take a rep, another breath, tighten your quads, tighten your glutes, and tighten your core, right? We want everything tight. So that is the setup, right? And that's the importance of proper bracing. So I'm gonna put it back now. As far as placement of the bar on your back, you wanna go pretty high up on your traps, right? That's because we're doing a high bar squat. Most throwers will do high bar squats. There are variations, like a lot of power lifters will do a low bar squat, which you can do, but I've found for athletic performance, high bar squats are gonna give you a lot more return on investment, right? So that's the setup, very important. Now let's actually take you through the actual lift. So the keys that I'm gonna walk you through here with the squat are depth, right? We're not going to here. We're going all the way down unless we're purposely doing a half or a quarter squat. We're gonna go all the way down, right? To parallel or even a little bit lower. We're gonna try to keep our upper body upright, right? That was something I did very, very well when I was squatting, was I kept myself upright. That's gonna allow you to do more reps, right? Because you're not dumping the barbell forward, but it's also gonna correlate really well to throwing, right? Because what's one of the things we wanna do in throwing? Keep our body upright while we're moving through the circle. So we wanna mimic that as we're doing a squat, right? So upright, and then I'm gonna wanna like push my knees apart, right? Get them nice and wide. So we don't wanna be doing this, right? That's gonna put a lot of stress on your patellar tendons. You wanna push your knees out to get more of that load on your hips and on your glutes, right? To save your knees. The other thing we're gonna think about, technically speaking, is pushing our knees out, but keeping them pushed out. A lot of times throwers will come on the descent, they're really good, and then their knees collapse in on the ascent part of the lift, right, as they're coming up. So those are some keys. Again, I like to keep technique as simple as possible. There's no need to overthink it, but those are some keys. Besides that, of course, keeping our feet planted on the ground, not coming up onto our toes at all. The elevated heel on the Olympic lifting shoes can be really helpful with that as well. So let's do a squat. Again, some guys will grip the bar like way out by the weights. I always took that's kind of personal preference, right? Like I always went for a more narrow grip, kind of similar to my bench press grip. And then I went for a high bar squat. So I'm getting it set. It's like just below like that bony part of your, like the spine in your neck where it sticks out. You're gonna go just below that, right onto the meat of your traps. And then the same setup we showed you. So I'm gonna brace, take it out, get set. Now my feet aren't gonna move. And remember what I'm thinking about. Brace, upright, knees out. And up. So my glutes were very active there. Let's do one more rep. There. So I'm feeling good about that. My lower body is activating properly and I'm ready to move up in weight, right? So you always want to start with the bar, move on to 135, and then gradually add weight through your workout. But those are the technical cues that you want to think about. In a later session, we're going to discuss some common mistakes and corrections in the technique, but that is the basics for the back squat. Okay, so we've gone through the technical basics of the back squat. Now we're gonna move into some different variations of the squat. The first one we're gonna talk about is the front squat. So I wanna say before we go into this, the basics of the depth, the specific warm-up, and the technical cues we looked at in the back squat will apply to the other variations. but there are going to be some specifics we'll look at with each of those as well. So the front squat, like I said, the first one we're going to look at. First thing I want to tell you about the front squat is the grip, right? It is, in a lot of ways, a more difficult variation of the squat than the back squat is. It was always one that I did very well, and I prided myself on having a very good front squat. And I think that was one of the assets that I had that allowed me to throw very far in the shot put and discus. But in a lot of ways, it's more difficult, but in a lot of ways, it also can have a lot more return on investment just because there's a lot more core activation and a lot of the ways you move in the front squat better apply to what you're doing in the circle. So it's definitely worth incorporating into your program. I wouldn't recommend you do a back squat and a front squat on the same lifting cycle, like pick one or the other. In general, front squats, we would do them at the University of Tennessee at some points in the off season, and then we would stick with back squats, usually box squats, once we got into the season, right? But it was a big part of our training, building that base. So first thing I want to talk about is how to grip the bar, right? Because we're, instead of going on our back, we're going on our front delts, basically front delts right below our neck. So there's a couple grip variations you can do. A lot of like bodybuilders and powerlifters will go for the cross arm style. I never used that, like this style here. I didn't like it because I found I couldn't get it like as close to my neck as I could with the other lift. And that's a big technical key with the front squat, is you want it to be as close to your throat as you can get it without choking yourself, right? We don't want to pass out, but we want to get it as close to our throat as we can because that allows the weight to be as centered as possible. So the other grip variation, the one that I did, was the Olympic grip, right? So you're going to notice when we move on to our clean videos, this is our catch position, right? When we catch the barbell, it's also a very good grip for the front squat. So that's what we're going to use. You have 3 fingers on the barbell. The pinky is outside the barbell, right? We're not doing this. We're going pinky outside the barbell, elbows up, right? So it does require some forearm flexibility. So if you're having issues getting into this position, we need to stretch out our forearms and spend some time, maybe even getting a little soft tissue massage work done on the forearms so that you're nimble enough to get into this position, right? But we need to keep elbows up. And when we have elbows up, that allows us to keep the bar in the correct position, right? So then from there, same bracing that we talked about in the back squat, tight core, up. And then from here, what I'm trying to think about is active core and keeping my body upright. If I fall forward, if I don't keep my upper body upright, I'm gonna dump the barbell, right? So we're here, I wanna keep my body upright, I wanna keep my elbows up. And then same knee cues as we talked about with the back squat. So let's do a rep. Up, upright, boom. See, perpendicular. Upright. See how my elbows didn't drop and my upper body didn't drop as well, right? So that is the front squat. Now, one thing that I did want to mention as well, if you're going real heavy on front squat, definitely worth putting a belt on and having some wrist support, right? Because with 135, no big deal, but if you're getting to 450, 500 pounds, that's a lot of weight on your wrists, and you want to have some type of wrist support to protect them so you're not having any ligament joint issues there. That is the front squat. Next, we're going to be moving on to the box squat variation. The next squat variation we're going to discuss in this course is the back box squat. So very similar to the regular back squat that we showed you, except instead of just squatting all the way down to full depth, we're going to squat, and then once our butt touches the box, we're going to immediately finish the rep, right? So this can be a really helpful variation because it's in some ways more explosive, right? Because that box kind of forces you to be a little faster as you're coming up from the lift on the ascent part of the lift, but also it's not as taxing on the body as a full back squat. So how I would recommend this plays out, and we'll talk about this more in the programming periodization part of this course. In general, you want to do a lot of full back squats during the off season we can afford to be really taxing at that point. And in fact, we want to build the base and the strength that the full squat provides us. As we're getting into the in season, we're throwing a lot more. We want to throw far in competition, especially at our state national championship, that kind of thing. So we still want to maintain some strength and explosiveness, but we don't want to tax our nervous system as heavily as we do with the full squat, right? So that's where the box squat can come into play. Now, as far as setting up the box, I'm using a bench here today. You can use a bench. You can use some like clean blocks, right? We're going to get into our box cleans later and how that works, but a bench is really good. You can even take a bench and you can pile weight plates on top of the bench to get the box higher to your desired height. One thing about the setup I want to point out, because I'm not being a good example today, but it's just how we had to set it up based on the building and where our racks are at filming. You want the box behind you, right? So you see how I have it in front of me today? That's not ideal. It's going to work for what we're doing, but you actually would want it, like in a perfect world, I would actually put it like behind me here, and then I would pick up the barbell, step back, and then just squat onto the box. So I'm not like climbing over top of a box with a loaded barbell, right? But for what we're doing today, this is what we're gonna do. So as far as box heights go, we're not gonna put any plates on this bench. This bench is about maybe 16 inches off the ground, maybe a little bit more. So this puts me at pretty much right at parallel if you look at my hip angle. There's different heights you can do. In general, what I'm gonna recommend if you're using this as an explosive squat variation that you're doing in the in season, I would recommend you go a little higher than parallel, somewhere closer to where a half squat would be for you, right? So maybe something like this, right? So if I were doing this in season, I would want probably another 3 to 4 inches of box height on top of this bench to get me into that explosive range, right? So the box squat really forces you to work on that top part of the rep. The descent is pretty much exactly the same, but it really kind of isolates that upper part of the lift. So in addition to being more explosive, it can also be a good way to build your regular squat if you're having trouble squatting out of the hole, right? If that's where you're missing your lifts. So same setup that we talked about with the regular back squat. The only thing is it's all about explosiveness off of the box, right? So when I'm gonna come down, I'm gonna descend in a controlled way, and then once I hit that box, I'm right back up, right? And it just really gets your lower body into that explosive frame of mind. So let's hit a few here. And I will try not to trip over this bench. So down and up. There. So you saw the explosiveness right off of the box. Again, very good variation to do in season. 90% of the time you will see lifters do box squats with a back squat positioning, right? Technically, you could do a box squat with like the front hold. I wouldn't bother with it, to be honest. I think you're gonna get more power out of the lift if you just throw it behind your neck and then do that variation. That is the box squat. So now that we've gone over the technique for the various squat variations, I want to talk about some common technical mistakes that you will see being made in the lift and some technical cues that you can think about so that you can avoid those. So this isn't going to be comprehensive by all means, right? So the issues you're having with your lift may be unique to you, but these are some very common mistakes that I see across the board, right? So the first one we're going to talk about in the squat is ego lifting and not getting full depth, right? So you'll see a lot of guys, they'll take a real heavy barbell off, they'll go down to like here and then come up and call it a squat, right? Now, there's nothing like inherently wrong with doing that. Like it's not going to put you at injury, like a risk of injury, but you are missing a huge part of the lift. And I should say as well, if you're trying to specifically do work on that upper range of the squat and you're trying to do a half or a quarter squat, doing it either off a box or just freestanding, that's okay, right? You can do variations, but if you're doing a full squat workout, you need to go at least parallel, if not a little bit lower, right? So in that case, it just comes down to controlling the barbell like all the way down until you get to here, and then driving up, right? So it can help to have a coach watch for your depth, to film your depth. And honestly, if you're having a problem where mobility-wise you can't hit depth, it just means you need to spend a lot more time developing your lower body mobility with some of the stretching that we showed you. Lower body mobility, specifically ankle mobility, I find can be a big limiting factor for hitting depth, right? So that would be the first mistake. The next one that I see, and is usually the reason why someone will fail a lift if they don't get it all the way up, is folding forward, right? So they come down, maybe they're good on the descent, or maybe they're not, maybe they're already coming down forward on the descent, and then when they try to drive it up, they get stuck under the bar and they can't get it up. So a lot of times that can come from a lack of core activation and also a lack of mobility, right? Because if you can't sit down and be straight up and down, it likely can be caused by some lack of hip mobility. So again, spend some time with the stretching so that you can comfortably sit in a squat position while being upright. But also, if it's not a mobility issue, a lot of times it's just a incorrect cue that you're thinking about, or a lack of core activation. So you really want to take the barbell off, and remember, deep belly breath. Hold, and then core activated throughout the whole lift, and pick a focal point, right? Don't look down, don't look up. Look straight ahead. So I got some trees out a window that I'm looking at right now. I'm gonna keep my eyes on those trees the whole way down, even when I'm at the bottom of the rep. And up. So the core activation and the focal point drill is very helpful for keeping your upper body where it should be. It's going to allow you to get more out of the lift and do it safely too, so that you're not putting your lower back in a less than ideal situation. Now, the final technical error that I see very commonly is what I call knee valgus, right? So knee valgus is essentially your knees collapsing as you go through the up portion of the lift, right? So remember we talked about the importance of pushing your knees out so that we're not putting a lot of pressure on our patella tendons. A lot of athletes, and I'll be honest, myself included, will have this issue where you'll go down, and then as you drive up, your knees collapse in and you're doing something like this, right? That can happen especially when you're fatiguing, when you're going real heavy. The solution to that is we need core and hip activation throughout the lift, right? So you got to think glutes are tight and glutes are engaged, and they stay engaged as I finish the lift. A lot of times when the glutes are shutting down, that's when the knees collapse, and then you're putting your patella tendons and other, features in your knee joint in a situation where they may get injured, right? So knee valgus, definitely something we want to avoid. It will happen a little bit, especially as you get heavier in weights, but a lot of times just doing some exercises like a barbell glute bridge, like something to isolate and strengthen your hips and your glutes, incorporating those type of accessories can help stop your knees from collapsing. The next lifts that we're going to cover in this course are the overhead lifts. So there's 3 categories that we're going to talk about in this one: the military press, the push press, and the overhead jerk, right? So we're going to show you the differences between the 3 of them. Overhead movements are some of the best pressing, the best upper body work you can do, because they so closely mimic the movement we're trying to create in the throw, right? So what are we doing in the shot put? We're pressing, not quite overhead, but just about overhead, right? We're pressing out here. What are we doing with pressing movements with a barbell? We're generating force from right here to right here. So very closely mimics what we're trying to do in the circle. So first variation that let's talk about is the military press. The military press, very, very simple, also called just an overhead press or a shoulder press. You're going to take it off the bar or off the rack. Notice my elbows are a little lower than how they were with the front squat or a clean. With a clean, I'm way up here, pinkies off the bar. With a military press, whole hand is gripping the bar, shoulders are much lower, right? Because we need our full hand on the bar to press properly. Now all I'm gonna do is drive the bar upward, right? No leg engagement at all. So you can do this seated or standing. We're doing it standing today. So I'm just here on my collarbone, pressing overhead. So the keys are, everything comes from the shoulders and arms, right? No legs. We're trying to isolate the upper body. And then I want to keep it as close to my face on the way up as I can, and then lock it out overhead. So I'm not locking out here, I'm locking out here because it's comfortable and I can balance everything right there, right? So again, collarbone, no legs, drive up, catch the bar. Let's rack the barbell and we'll talk about our next variation, which is going to be the push press. So in a lot of ways, the push press is a good in-between between the military press and the jerk, and I'm going to show you why. So with the push press, we're starting to bring a little bit of leg drive into the movement. So very similar variation, except this time we're going to go, again, front grip. You can do the push presses off like behind the neck as well, but we'll just show you front grip today. And then you're gonna go down into a quarter squat and then time your like explosion up with your legs and your arms. And then we're gonna come up here. So I'm using some of my leg power to drive that barbell up. So I'm down, explode up. So the key is timing, right? You don't wanna go, also you don't wanna go too low. So you're just going like a quarter squat down, not far at all, maybe even a little bit less than that. And you need to time your drive with your legs and your upper body. So it's not drive up and then press, it's drive both at the same time. Boom. So very good movement. You should be able to go probably, I don't know, at least 20–30% heavier with a push press versus a regular military press. And again, it's getting closer to mimicking that throwing motion by incorporating some lower body drive. So military press, push press, the overhead jerk, that's what we're gonna show you next. So I'll say again, you can do jerks off a front grip. More commonly, specifically for throwers, they're gonna be done behind the neck because it's more stable, it's a little safer, and you can go quite a bit heavier behind the neck as well. So we're gonna take the barbell off. Same bracing as we talked about with the squat. Deep belly breath, tighten everything, and then you're gonna go down into the same descent as you did with a push press, but you're gonna drive up, and what we're actually gonna do is take our feet off the ground and then catch ourselves. So we're gonna show you two variations, the regular jerk and the split jerk. So regular jerk, you're down, overhead, and then you push your feet out to the side with the catch, right? So I'll do that again. So I'm coming down, I'm driving my lower body, my upper body at the same time, and I'm actually coming off the ground, right? And then catching myself. So it's more explosive, and you can, again, go heavier with this than you would, say, with a push press, certainly with a military press. So that's the regular jerk, is you catch your feet out to the side. So it's a symmetrical movement, is a good way to think about it. The split jerk, very similar, except on our catch, I'm thrusting a leg out forward, and I'm almost going into a little bit of a lunge, right, for my catch, and then I'll bring my feet together. So I'll show you that one. So I'm down, catch. So what I've done there is I've chosen to go off my power, I've chosen to put my power leg forward, my right leg, and that's what I would recommend you do for a split jerk. So again, we're down. Good, there. So the split jerk and the regular jerk are very similar. You'll see Olympic lifters will generally do a split jerk. Usually you can go a little heavier with a split jerk just because it allows you to get into a deeper catch position, so you can kind of drop under the bar and then stabilize yourself. So again, very good variation because we're exploding from the ground up with our legs and transferring that power into our upper body, which is what we're doing in the throwing events as well. One thing I want to mention, as you get heavy with the jerks, definitely throw a belt on, put some sleeves on, and you also want to get ideally in a gym where they have jerk blocks. So we don't have any here today, but the jerk blocks are essentially blocks that will sit about this high on either side of you. You put the barbell on top of those. They give you enough room so that you can stand up with it. You can squat down a little bit, catch yourself, and then just throw the bar down onto the block. So that way you're not having to bring the bar and like bounce it off of your spine and risk some some damage in your neck, right? You can just throw it down and you don't have to worry about catching it. So it's a much more safe variation. So those are the overhead lifts. Again, you want to incorporate all of them, but the push press and especially the jerk are really helpful because they incorporate lower and upper body power, and they just allow you to generate a lot, and it correlates very well to what we're trying to do in the circle, like I was saying. Let's talk about some common mistakes and corrections that I see in the overhead lifts. So let's talk about the military press first. And I will say the military press is a much more simple lift than the push press and especially the jerk. It's pretty hard to mess up, to be honest, but I'll show you some of the main things that athletes will struggle with. First, it's going to be pressing the barbell too far from their body, right? So remember we talked about how you want to be just outside of your nose and then catch it. A lot of athletes they'll kind of be pressing way out here. If you get caught way out in space like this with a loaded barbell, it's gonna be really hard to finish that lift. Like even with the bar, I can see how much harder it is to hold it out here versus in here, right? It's because it's over my body and it's stacked, right? It's centered. So that's the first thing. Keep it close to your face, not so close that you hit yourself. And then the catch position as well. Keep it like over, even slightly behind your head, right? Because it's easier to balance up there. You don't want to catch it way out here. You want to catch it back here. So that is the military press. Now, for the jerk, it's going to be timing jerk and push press, right? Well, this is kind of a mistake that will affect both, but it's going to be like mistiming the drive portion of the lift. So a lot of athletes will come in and they'll do this, they'll come up with the legs, and then they'll try and do a press, right? So you got to think, I need to go down and then drive with my legs and arms at the same time. Up, there, right? So that's going to be the most common mistake with the jerk, is mistiming that. So just make sure you hit your descent, and then on your way up, you're driving with your arms and legs, and they're synced with each other, right? So you're down, up, and catch. Those are a few mistakes that I see with the overhead pressing movements. Just make sure that your catch position is over top of your body and that you're timing up the drive with your legs and your upper body as well. The next lift that we're going to be discussing is the bench press. So in this video, we're going to talk technique, setup, and some different variations that you can do with this lift. Now, talked about the squat being the king of all lifts. The bench press, as far as upper body lifts, is the king of all lifts as well. It's one of those that if you're going to be a high level, especially a high level shot putter, it's really important that you have a big bench press, right? Now, that doesn't mean you want to rush and put yourself at risk of injury, but it does mean that you want to find a coach and make sure that you're pursuing the lift safely with correct technique and gradually building up and increasing your weight and your strength on this lift with time. So very heavy emphasis on the pecs, the triceps, and the front delts in this one. So let's talk about setup first, right? So the first thing, you want to set up your rack at a height that's comfortable for you, right? You want to set up the barbell at a height that's comfortable. You don't want it way out of reach where you can barely get it off, and you don't want it way down here either, so that where you have to basically do a rep to get it off, right? Somewhere in the middle where it's comfortable for you. There are, bench press specific units, like as far as equipment goes. Today we're just doing it in a rack. Either or is safe, but if you're doing it in a rack, you just got to make sure you're setting up your bench and your rack at a correct height and in the correct position. So let's talk about setup first on this lift. The first thing, you're going to come down, and then you want to line up your nose, basically your nose with the barbell.
right? That's where you want to be. So you actually want to be somewhat forward of what I see a lot of athletes doing when they set this up. Next, you want to get your hips underneath you. So you see I kind of was already in that position, but I have my feet underneath, like they're basically under my glutes. I'm on my toes essentially, and the reason why I'm doing that is it allows me to get my hips more underneath me, and then that allows me to get some good hip drive, right? So from there, see I got the bar at a good height. I'm going to take my grip. We'll talk about grip in a second. I'm going to tighten my upper body, and hips are also ready to activate, and I'm going to take the bar off the rack, right? And I got my shoulder blades pulled back, and I got everything tight. So that's the setup, right? Everything tight and our hips underneath us. Now, when we're going to take a lift, the keys are, I'll come back up, the keys are we want to keep our elbows close to our body, right? Like close to our sides, no elbow flare, right? That's gonna put your shoulders in a less than ideal situation. And you also wanna get some drive from your hips as well. Now, something to keep in mind, if you're powerlifting, it's a rule that you have to keep your butt on the bench. Good rule, right? It kind of forces you into a position where you're using more upper body. As a thrower, you don't have to follow that rule, right? So that's why you will see throwers kind of lifting their hips off of the bench to get a little more leg drive. That is okay to do, right? We're not in a sanctioned powerlifting meet. And if you feel like it creates a more explosive lift for you to engage your hips more and lift your butt off the bench a little bit, that is okay to do, right? And no throws coach is gonna fault you for that. So the keys here are shoulders, elbows tucked, right? You want them at a bit of an angle. It's not like right in like this, but it's like somewhere in the middle, right? We're not here, we're about here. And then I want to take the bar down and like basically just on the bottom of my pecs is where I want to touch. So I'm not way up here. I'm not way on my belly either. I'm kind of right here. And there is some leeway. Like some guys will like it a little bit lower down. Other guys will come up closer to mid pec point. Find what's comfortable for you. Just make sure you're not way down on your belly or way up on your collarbone with where you bring the bar. The other thing is in bench or in powerlifting competitions, you're actually going to bring the barbell down and pause and then do a rep. You can do pause reps for throws training. I never did many of them because they're not as explosive, right? So I find just bringing it down and up is a much more explosive variation and is going to correlate better to throwing. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's get set again. Nose in line with the bar, hips underneath me. My feet stay planted, right? I'm not moving around with my lower body. Shoulder blades pulled back, everything tight, bar off, breath in, and then it's down and up, keeping my elbows in. So you saw I kept my elbows in, and I actually did get a little bit of a bounce off my chest. Again, not powerlifting sanctioned, but for throws training, that can be advantageous. The other thing that I want to highlight is just the importance of hip drive, right? So I'll try to exaggerate it a little bit more, but you can use more hips. So for this one, I'm going to really drive my hips on the way up with the barbell. So I'm down. So you saw that little drive. My butt did come off the bench, so that wouldn't have counted for powerlifting, but it can be helpful as you're getting further on in a set. You're tiring, or you're going a little heavier, and you're wanting to get some more explosion into the rep, right? So that is technique. I want to talk about a few more things. We want to talk about grip, and we want to talk about some variations that you can use for this lift. So the first one is grip. There's basically close grip, medium grip, and then really wide grip. A closer grip is in the bench press is going to utilize a lot more tricep power. Wider grip is going to be more pec dominant. That's not to say that, you know, a close grip doesn't use pec power and vice versa, but it just means what you're emphasizing more. This is a personal preference. A lot of throwers will use a real wide grip, right? For me personally, I always found a medium to close grip was a way that I could lift heavier, right? Because I've always had strong triceps, been a really tricep dominant athlete.
But also I found it just correlated a little better to throwing, right? Because think about it, when you're throwing a shot put, it's a close grip press that you're doing. You're not way out here pressing. You're right close to your face and you're pressing out this way. So I always found there was a little bit more of a correlation doing a closer grip. That doesn't mean you have to be right here, right? It just means you're kind of a little wider than shoulder width and you're hitting it there. So play around with some grips, find what's comfortable for you. There's no rule that says you have to use this grip or have to use that grip. In fact, sometimes at different points in the year, you may work on a little more tricep power, and then later you want to work on a little more pec power, and then you kind of vary your grips that way. So find what works for you. A few more things I wanted to talk about in the bench press. First is gear. So you want to have some wrist support, right? Some guys will, when they go real heavy, they'll bench with a belt. I never did that. Not really necessary in my opinion, but the wrist support, very, very important as you go heavy, and it will help protect your wrists, help you go a little heavier as well. The other thing I want to highlight, this is a lesser known piece of equipment. This is called a slingshot, right? The slingshot is a very helpful piece of equipment if you're having shoulder problems with your lift, which I did, unfortunately, towards the end of my career. I did run into some shoulder injuries, which made it hard to bench press until I found this piece of equipment. So the slingshot, great investment if you're having shoulder issues. You basically put it on, it's gonna wrap around your, your triceps just over your elbow. And then what it does is, I'll do a few reps with it, but it kind of forces your elbows into the correct position. So it keeps your shoulders from flaring outwards. And it also gives you a little bit of an elastic push off of your chest, right? So it makes it a bit more of an explosive movement. So I'll hit a few reps with it. It's been a few years since I used this thing, but I got a lot of good reps with it. So I'm down, up, up. So you saw it kind of forces your upper body into the correct position, gives you a little bit of push off the chest. So very good to protect the shoulders, the slingshot. As far as variations of the bench press, there's different variations. The most common ones are going to be the incline bench press, which is a similar setup, but it's just more shoulder, more pec dominant. It can definitely be a good variation to use. And in a lot of ways, it actually, some ways can correlate better to the throw, because if you think about a shot put press, it's more of an overhead press than it is a flat bench press, right? So incline bench, very helpful. Board bench, probably the most common variation that I did that really helped me build my bench up to, at my peak, upwards of 450 pounds, right? So a pretty solid bench. I used a lot of board bench. So we have just a 2x6 here. And basically how that works is you have like a partner place the bench on your chest, and then you just lower the bench onto the board and then explode up. So it's basically the box squat for bench press, right? It's more explosive and it really works that top end range. And I found when I was lifting, I was really good off my chest, but I was not so good like in the upper half of the lift. Like I would usually lose it right here and I couldn't lock out. This really helped isolate that part of the lift. You can use one board, all the way up to 4 or 5 boards, right? Depending on what rep range you're wanting to work. So the board bench, another very, very effective version of the bench press that you can utilize in your training. Let's talk about some common technical mistakes that I see being made in the bench press. And the first one is gonna come just with an improper setup, right? So a lot of athletes will come, they'll maybe have their feet kind of dangling out here. They'll just loosely place them down, not underneath them, just out here. Their shoulder blades aren't pulled back and they're just too loose, right? And then they take the bar off and they're all shaky, feet are, moving around. That's no good, right? You're not gonna hit a big lift doing it that way. So we need a good solid setup. You need to take all the slack out of the bar, so to speak, pull in your shoulder blades, get your hips underneath you, and make sure that your feet don't move, right? So that's gonna be the biggest mistake. Another common one, elbows flaring, right? I don't even wanna do this because it's not good for your shoulders, but I'll show you a demo. So with the elbows flaring, notice how my elbows were tucked in last time? When the elbows flare, they're just out like this. Feels real bad on the shoulders.
to do that, right? So just make sure that when the bar's coming down, you're keeping your elbows tucked in close to your sides. Again, they don't have to be right here, but they want to be out like this way, not flared out like this. You're going to have a lot of shoulder issues that way, right? The last mistake is just going to be the setup and the lack of use of hip drive, right? So hip drive, like I showed you, it's going to come from first getting your hips underneath you, but then it's going to come from timing a drive with your lower body and your hips as you come up with the bar, right? That's going to allow you to be a lot more explosive with the lift, and go quite a bit heavier as well, and just get some more out of the bench press. So just make sure you're watching your elbow flare, you're setting it up properly, and you're using good hip drive as you're completing your reps. Okay, so we're ready to move into our first Olympic lift demonstration. We're gonna go through technique for the clean in this video, right? So we just have the empty barbell, that's what we're gonna start with. And if you're new or even at like an intermediate level with this and you're just wanting to learn and reinforce correct technique, please start with an empty barbell, right? Even a broomstick, right? But at the very least, just an empty barbell. Don't load on a bunch of weight and then try to work on technique. We really need to learn the movement patterns first before we load up the bar. So I'm gonna walk you through a drill progression that's very helpful for learning this lift, because they're very technical, right? The clean and the snatch, very, very technical. It's a whole individual sport at the Olympics in of itself. People spend their whole lives mastering these lifts, right? So I'm not the world's best expert at Olympic lifting, but I have spent many, many years doing these lifts and learning them. So I'm gonna show you what I've learned and what I know. So with a clean, the first thing, grip. Let's talk about that. So you wanna start with your feet shoulder width, or maybe slightly wider than shoulder width, maybe flared out just a little bit. And then you want to use a pretty close grip, maybe thumbs, like a thumb length outside of that smooth part, the smooth inner part of the barbell, right? So that's your grip. Now let's walk you through the teaching progression. So the first one is just gonna be a deadlift off the floor. That's the first part of the clean. And that's what we're showing you in this, is a full clean off of the floor. We're gonna look at a box clean and a hang clean later, but for now, we're looking at the full clean. So just a deadlift, right? We're just gonna do it with the empty bar. So you're here, if there were weights on it, right against your shins, deadlift. Keys, it's right against my shin and it's close to my body through that whole lift, right? That's the first part, very easy to execute. It's just a deadlift. You've probably done deadlifts off the floor before, right? So it's right here. And then into that hip pocket. Now, next variation is a clean pull. So what you're gonna do is you're not gonna do just a deadlift, we're actually gonna incorporate a bit of a hip drive into this, right? So that's why as you're coming up through that deadlift, we want upper body like over the bar, hips back, and then when you get to here, you're driving your hips into the bar. It's a common mistake, we'll get into that more, but it's just a lack of hip drive, right? So it's very important, you're here, and then you're driving into the bar, and you're extending upwards, so you're starting that process, no arm movement yet, right? So deadlift to hip drive, right? So that's a clean pull or a low pull, right? So it's down here, no arm drive. So the next variation is we're gonna do a high pull, right? So deadlift, hip drive, and then I'm actually gonna bring the bar upwards with my upper body, which is the last thing I would do before I actually go and catch the barbell, right? So I'll do it in slow motion first. Deadlift, hip drive, high pull, upper body. We really want, I'm moving my arms, but we really want most of that upward drive to come from the hips and the lower body, right? So that's why it can be even a helpful drill, just work that hip drive a few times, right? Now let's incorporate the high pull. So down, high pull. Extension, right? Extension. So deadlift, pull, high pull. Now it's time for the catch, right?
So the last step after we've caught the barbell, or after we've high pulled the barbell, is we need to drop underneath it and catch that bar on our collarbone. So a good way to think about this is the catch position is similar to how we were talking about catching the jerk, a regular jerk. And then the bar position on your shoulders is the same position we taught you in the front squat, right? So that's why when we go from the high pull here, we got to drop under and catch, under and catch. So you see I'm actually coming off the ground, and then I put my feet out a little wider to catch myself. Bar is kind of, I'm bringing my elbows up and my pinky's now off the bar, right? So you can see it's in that same front squat position. So that's the last part. So we're here from the high pull, catch, rack position on your shoulders. So what does it look like putting all that together? Let's do slow-mo first. So deadlift, pull, high pull, catch, rack position, finish the lift. Let's do those. Let's do one full speed now. So from the ground, boom, easy, right? So it can be really helpful, even when you're an experienced lifter, go through that drill sequence, go through that drill progression when you're learning how to do the clean. And it's really going to be helpful for you as far as just breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, right? Deadlift, deadlift pull, deadlift with high pull with catch, catch, boom. So that is the clean. Now, we're gonna talk about some different clean variations in a minute, but I wanna share just the difference between a power clean and a full clean, right? Because it's an important variation. Most throwers will do just a power clean, right? And a power clean is what I've been doing this whole time. So power clean is where you drop, you're not dropping into a full squat, right? Not at all. Like you're just going into like a quarter squat to catch it and you come back up. A full clean is where you drop underneath the barbell and do a full squat down, right? So I'm here, down, full squat, and then up. So that's an Olympic variation, right? That's what they do at the Olympics. So it's the catch position that differentiates a full clean from a power clean. Again, vast majority of throwers will just do a power clean. If you're gonna do full cleans at all, do them in the off season, right? Definitely don't do them as a part of the in season. Very taxing on the nervous system. And honestly, the power clean has a lot of the same explosive benefits that you're gonna find in the full clean, but it's not quite as taxing on the body, right? And in a lot of ways, it's more explosive because you have to have a stronger pull to get it up to your body rather than just dropping all the way down underneath the bar, right? So that is power, full clean. Next, we're gonna talk about some variations like the box clean and the hang clean. But I do wanna close on this thought, just the benefits of doing this, right? Because you may be wondering, Coach Joe, why do I have to work so hard at learning this technique? Why is this an important lift? Number one, learning a very technical event in the weight room correlates well to throwing because throwing is a very technical event. So just mindset-wise, if you can wrap your head around learning something as technical as the Olympic lift, it's gonna make you a better athlete in the circle. You're gonna be more receptive to your coach's technical directions. You're gonna pick up things faster and easier. The other thing is it's just such an explosive full body movement, right? The problem with a lot of lifts, like if you go and do some press downs or some curls or some overhead press, great lifts, they'll make your body strong, right? And you'll build some muscle, but that's not what we're doing in the circle. What we're doing in the circle is a full body explosive movement. It starts from the ground up. It starts with legs. Upper body finishes everything off. You have to have very explosive hips, and that's the nice thing that the Olympic lifts do. They teach you to use your full body in a very explosive manner, and you build all kinds of power that's gonna help you out in the ring. So that is the clean overview. Remember, start with the barbell, start light, gradually increase weights, technique first, always, always, always with the Olympic lifts, or you're gonna put yourself at risk of injury. So next we'll look at some different variations of the clean. The first variation of the clean we're gonna look at is the hang clean, right? It all comes to the setup position, the difference between a full clean or a clean off the floor and a hang clean. So with a hang clean, we're not starting from the floor, we're actually starting from that hip pocket, right? So it's best to actually like have it on a rack. Like I know I picked it up off the floor, but you wanna have it off a rack, pick it up, step out a little bit, and then go do your reps. So it's already in that hip pocket, so we don't have this whole part of the lift to worry about, right? We're just in that hip pocket. You're gonna come down a little bit and then drive the hips into that catch position. So it's a very similar lift, or the hip portion of the lift is all the same. You're just taking out the bottom part of it, right? So you're just coming forward, down a little bit, hips back, drive the hips and catch, right? So it's just hips, drive and catch. So it's a much more explosive variation because you have a shorter period of time to accelerate the barbell. So for me personally, I actually always struggled with the hang cleans because I did better having a lot more time to accelerate the barbell, allowed me to go a lot heavier. I had teammates who were much better off a hang than they were off the ground. A lot of times if you have like lower back issues or you're just not strong off the floor, it can be a better variation for those type of athletes. So very good variation, a little less taxing on the body and the nervous system than a full clean would be. I would say as far as programming goes, again, we'll get into this more, but the hang clean is best done in the in-season because it's a more explosive variation and it's less taxing on the body. So you should be starting to see a pattern here with the periodization model is that full lifts, we want in the off season to build a base. Variations, like explosive variations, like a box squat or a hang clean, in season, more explosive, still good benefit, but not as taxing on the body. So that is the hang clean. Next, we're going to look at the box clean. Okay, so the next variation that we're gonna cover is the box clean, right? Very similar to coming off of the floor, same setup, we have it set up here, except it's just raised a little bit, right? So again, this correlates very closely to like a board bench for the bench press or a box squat for the squat, right? It's just changing up the movement path a little bit, right? And kind of you have different focus points for what you're trying to build on that lift. So we have blocks about 4 inches off the ground today. You can use a range of heights, right? If you're kind of working lower to the ground, you want a lower box, but if you really want to strengthen that upper portion of the initial pull, then you want to go higher. So you can go blocks all the way from 2 inches all the way up to 12 inches, right? And anything in between, depending on what you're targeting for that session. So we just got some, medium height blocks today. One thing I want to mention is with Olympic lifting, you always want to use bumper plates if you can, right? So the bumper plates are plastic synthetic material, so there's a little bit of a bounce to them, so they're not damaging to floors. We don't have any in the gym today, so I've just put on some metal plates and I'm going to be careful. We're not going very heavy either, so it doesn't really matter. But when you're going heavy on an Olympic lift, you definitely want bumper plates. So we have our block set up and I'm going to show you, like, again, very similar setup to the floor clean. Basically, like how you're going to set it up, and this applies to the floor clean setup as well, which we didn't do with weights, so it can be helpful to go over it again. Feet position. Again, shoulder width. I want the middle of my foot, so it's that spot right in between my straps of my shoes. When I look down, that's where I want the bar, right? That's the first step. Now I'm just standing here. Now, I'm going to squat down. When my shins touch the bar, that's when I know I've squatted down low enough. So you don't want to force it and get down lower, and you don't want to be like up here either, right? So we want to go mid-foot, squat down, boom, that's my starting position. A little higher up than it would be from the floor. Grip, we talked about that already, but a thumb length outside of the middle part of the bar. And then once you're here, you want all the slack out of the bar. There's no slack in my body. I'm not moving around, I'm tight, right? Everything's tight. And then from there, I'm in an explosive position, and I want to think, as I'm coming up, I want to keep my body over the bar, keep my hips back as long as I can. And once the bar is in that hip pocket, then I want to thrust my hips forward and up, pull, high pull, and then catch. So that's the key. Shoulders and body need to stay over the bar as long as they can, and then hips drive in, and then we're into our catch portion of the lift, right? So let's do a rep here. Set up, shins. So watch my upper body. It's going to stay over the bar, and I'm going to drive my hips and then catch the bar. There, so I got a really good solid hip drive, and that's what made it easy to drop under and catch the bar. That is the box clean. Again, very similar to off the floor, just works a slightly higher up movement range. Let's talk about some common technical mistakes that I see being made in the clean and some mental technical cues that you can think about to avoid those yourself. So with the clean, like I said, very technical lift, right? And it's very important to break it down piece by piece so that you've mastered each element of the lift, because there's many different elements that all kind of come together to create the lift. But I would say the first thing is going to be on the setup, right? And the setup, athletes are not tight enough, and they kind of have the bar outside of their shins. So they're like here, right? So we need to be tight, right? We need to take all the slack out of our upper body, and we need that bar right against our shins, right? So the setup. So make sure bar is against your shins, arms are straight, and there's no slack in your upper body. We're not moving around, right? We're tight. So that's the setup. The next mistake that I see being made is the movement path of the bar, right? And that the bar is coming way away from our body right from the time we're deadlifting, right? If we're out here, it's a lot harder to generate force with the bar out here versus close to our body here. It's much easier to stay balanced. So make sure as you go through both the deadlift portion of the squat or of the clean and the pull portion of the clean, you're keeping it as close to your body as you can. It's not coming out here. It's staying in here, right? Very important. The next mistake that I see being made is going to be a lack of hip drive. And this is one that I definitely struggled with when I was a high school athlete before I had a coach to actually teach me the technical points of the clean. I would just kind of come in, do a deadlift, and then just try to drop under it. There was no hip engagement. So remember, it's not just a deadlift and a catch. It's a deadlift, a pull, and then a catch. So we need hip engagement. So we need our hips back, right? And we got to keep them back until we're ready to drive, until we get the bar to, mid-thigh or even a little higher up. And then we got to drive our hips into the bar. Drive. So you can even practice that. You can hit reps here, practicing that hip drive. The other reason that causes athletes to not get enough hip engagement is not having their body over the barbell enough. So that's a good cue for the clean, and actually especially the snatch, as we're going to get into, is through the deadlift, you got to keep your body over the bar, and you got to keep your body over the bar because that keeps your hips back, right? If I'm here already, I can't drive my hips, right? But if I'm here, boom, I can drive my hips and I get all that power. So make sure you are keeping your body over the bar, keeping your hips back until you reach that hip pocket, drive the hips and drive upward and go into your catch, right? So the last mistake that I'm going to talk about, common mistake, is just the catch position, in that a lot of athletes don't have enough mobility to actually get the barbell on top of their front delts, right against their neck with their elbows up. This is the correct catch position right here. But it takes a lot of shoulder and especially forearm flexibility to get there. So if your catch is something like this, that's no good, right? That's no good. You got all that weight sitting on your wrists. We can need to be here. And to get there, a lot of times it comes down to knowing to, like, you need to transition your grip from, you know, regular grip here. The pinky needs to actually slide off, right? See, I'll try to do it a little slower, but it's gonna come up and then look, pinky's off, 3 fingers onto that ledge on my shoulders, right? So if you're struggling with the catch position, make sure you're doing plenty of shoulder mobility, lots of shoulder mobility work, lots of forearm stretching to stretch out those muscles to allow you to get into the correct clean catch position. The next Olympic lift we're going to talk about is the snatch. This is between the clean and the snatch. The snatch is a lot more technical, right? But it does have some benefits over the clean as well. Mainly with the catch position being overhead, it's a much longer movement path for the bar, right? So you have more time to accelerate the barbell and, you know, more time under tension to generate explosiveness. First thing I'm gonna say about this, same thing with learning this as we did with the clean, where we start with the empty barbell or even a broomstick, same thing applies for the squat. The squat also has a lot of mobility, body mobility requirements that the clean doesn't have, right? Mainly in that overhead squat position. So before you even start learning the technique of the snatch, I really want you to spend some time in that catch position, getting comfortable and mobile enough to do that. So a great drill or lift that you can do before you start learning the snatch is the overhead squat, right? So again, grip for the snatch is quite a bit wider. Some guys will go way out here. I always liked about 4 inches in from the area where the weights are held. And then the overhead squat, you're gonna go overhead, elbows locked out, feet slightly wider than shoulder width, and then you're gonna squat down. Boom. It's been a little bit, and I'm feeling that mainly through my chest and biceps, right? That's where I'm feeling it most. But I'm gonna settle and then up here. So it takes a lot of mobility and a lot of stability as well to be in that position. So if you can't physically hit a full overhead squat right now just with the barbell, you need to take some time to work on your mobility through your chest, through your hips, through your upper back to get to a point where you can execute that lift comfortably. Because if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to catch the bar properly with the snatch. So the snatch, let's talk right from the beginning. How it's going to go is we're doing from the floor first. From the floor to your pull movement, and then you're going to take your pull not to here like with the clean, but all the way overhead, right? And then this is your catch position, right? So our learning variations, we're going to start with a snatch grip deadlift, right? Just like the clean. So we're here, boom, here, boom. Keys, upper body is staying over the bar as long as possible. And same for the clean, I'm keeping the bar as close to my body, as close to my legs and my hip pocket as I can. It's not coming way out here. That's no good. It's almost dragging along my shins, and then I'm into the pull and into the hip pocket, right? So from there, snatch grip deadlift to the pull with the hip engagement. So here, right, just like the clean, here, the clean, and then we're gonna go into a high pull, right? So high pull, we incorporate that upper body movement, get it up, ideally to our neck, right? So here, hips and pull. Hips and pull, right? So by getting it up here, as you'll see in the next step, I'm getting myself into a position where I can drop under, finish the rep, right? So, down, high pull. Now, the next is that catch portion, right? So, when we're here, we need to get it overhead
and simultaneously get underneath it, right, into our catch position. So let's put that all together. So I'll go slowly one time, then we'll go full speed. So deadlift, hip, high pull, catch. Get under it and get into that overhead squat position. Let's do one full speed. Boom, right there. So same thing with the clean, the power snatch and the full snatch. Same thing, it all comes down to the catch position, right? With the full snatch, I'm catching here, I'm not dropping all the way down like I just did there. With the full snatch, dropping all the way down, right? So power snatch, I'm here. Full snatch, I'm here. All the way down, just like an Olympic lifter. So those are the basics of the snatch. It really all comes down to keeping the bar close to your body, hip engagement, dropping underneath it. Next, we're gonna look at some variations of this lift. So the first variation with the snatch that we're gonna look at is the hang snatch, right? And again, very similar to what we talked about with the clean, it all comes down to the starting position. So off the floor, self-explanatory. We showed you the box snatch. Now we're gonna show you the hang snatch. Grip is the same. However, everything starts in the hip pocket, right? So we're ideally taking it off the rack at about this height. We're stepping out so that we have enough room to do what we wanna do, right? And it's all in that hip pocket. So I'm gonna come down, lean forward a little bit, and then it's all about that explosive drive with the hip, same movement as off the floor, pull, and then underneath. So it's the same explosive movement and catch with the hips and upper body as it was from the floor, except we're eliminating the deadlift portion of it, basically, right? So we're gonna go here, forward a little bit, hips, underneath, boom. Easy peasy, right? So forward, hips, boom, right? So by coming forward and getting our hips back a little bit, I'm giving myself room to do this, right? If I'm just right here, I can't really engage my hips, right? So that's why I want to come down a little bit, hips back, boom, drive, drop underneath. So shorter movement path, more explosive, and like the hang clean, it's best done in season, right? We like to set a base at the beginning of the season or beginning of the off season with the full snatches moving into box snatches. And once we're in season, the hang snatches give us some good explosive movement without being super taxing on our nervous system. The next snatch variation that we're going to talk about is the box snatch. So again, very similar to the clean. This is similar to the snatch off the floor, right? It's just, it's working on a slightly different rep range. So the setup with the lower body, very similar to the clean as well. We got that midway point on the feet with the barbell. The grip is the main thing that's different, right? So on this bar, you want to go a little bit wider, quite a bit wider than you would on a clean. So some athletes will go way out to the end of the weights. Other athletes are going to go a little bit further in. So I would do, for me, I'm going to go about a thumb length and a half in from this little ring, this little smooth ring here. And I have some straps on just to help me to grip the bar. So I'm going to get strapped in. Yeah, and then feet, again, shoulder width, got that midpoint on the feet, and then I'm down into my starting position. Now again, the key, my shoulders and my upper body need to stay over the bar as long as I can. Then I can drive my hips into the bar, get the bar overhead, and finally catch it. So let's do a rep here. There, stabilize, nice and safe, down to the hip pocket, and back onto the boxes. That's the box snatch. Let's talk about some common technical mistakes in the snatch and how you guys can avoid those to have great technique and get a lot out of this lift, because it's a very useful one. So the first thing, a lot of these are similar to the clean, but I want to show them to you
in the context of a snatch because they can look a little different in practice. So the first one is going to be the setup, right? So with the clean, we need our, our arms out nice and wide, and then we need that bar right against our mid shins, right? When we're starting. Back up and flat, eyes ahead, right? Right here. So we don't want to be out here. We don't want to have the back rounded. This is our position. The next thing is a lot of times athletes will, as they're going through the movement, keep the bar way far from their body, right? And just try to bring it way, way out. But if you bring that bar way, way out, it's going to be really hard to actually hit that lift. A lot of times you're going to miss it. So as you go through your snatch, grip, deadlift, your pull, and your catch, we need to keep that bar as close to our body as we possibly can. Through the deadlift portion, it's actually going to drag along our shins. It's going to make contact with our hips, and then it's actually almost going to clip our nose on the way up, and our nose and our face, right? We obviously don't want to do that because that's going to hurt a lot, but we do need to keep it as close as we possibly can, right? So that is the first set of mistakes. The next one is going to be the lack of hip engagement, which correlates with the upper body position. So a lot of athletes won't have their upper body over the bar enough. They'll kind of be more upright here, and then it's harder to get that hip drive, right? But we need our hips back, and we need our upper body and our shoulders over the bar, right? That is the cue we want to think about. Over the bar, hips back, so that we can go and get a good drive, right? And really engage our hips and then go into that catch, right? The last mistake, similar to the clean, is going to be the catch position, but it looks a little different on this one. So a lot of athletes struggle with the catch on the snatch because it requires so much mobility, and we talked about this earlier. So a lot of athletes, their catch is going to look like something like this, right? They're way out forward, and then it's, again, really hard to hit the lift properly that way and catch it safely because it's not centered over your body. So how it should look is you're here, look, way back, right? It's back over my head. Now that does take a lot of mobility. So if you're struggling with the catch position, do some foam rolling on your upper back. Get a band and stretch out your pecs and your shoulders. Just some of the exercises we did as a part of the warm-up on this series. And if you do those enough for long enough, you're going to get comfortable in that squat position. As we pointed out earlier, the overhead squat with a barbell is also a great variation to learn the correct catch position in the snatch. Well, that concludes our weightlifting video masterclass. Thank you so much for spending some time with me, and I truly hope this has been helpful for you as you work on your strength and explosiveness in the gym. I wanted to share a couple final thoughts for you to chew on, just some final things to keep in mind that aren't related to the specific technique of the lifts. Number one, make sure you guys are staying healthy in the weight room. The last thing you want is to get injured trying to do a lift, right? It's one thing to get injured in the circle, right? Or have like an overuse injury from your sport. Not that we want to be injured, but that's more understandable. You don't want to be pushing yourself to a point in the weight room where you hurt yourself, right? That's no good. That's not where we want to be injuring ourselves. Of course, we don't want to be injuring ourselves at all, but please be safe, right? Be safe in the weight room. Don't push the weights so heavy to a point where your form's breaking down, you're at risk of injury, because a lot of times you're actually not getting a lot of benefit when you push to that level as well. So be safe, have a partner, a spotter when you get to really heavy lifts, when you're doing max testing, and above all, have the correct intention when you're in the weight room. When we are in the weight room as throwers, we're not trying to be power lifters. We're not trying to be Olympic lifters. We're trying to be better, more explosive throwers, right? So just having that mental intention behind things. We're not trying to be bodybuilders either, right? Everything that we do in the gym needs to serve what we're doing in the circle. And I find approaching the gym with that mental frame can go a lot so that your sessions are a lot more productive. So be safe, have fun, and above all, throw far. Thank you so much.